The heat from the cruisers had scorched Judge Terrence Dawson's cheek as a knee pinned him down, metal cuffs biting into his wrists. Around him, strangers shouted, phones recorded, and still, no one listened as he calmly repeated, "You're making a mistake." Less than 5 minutes earlier, all he wanted was a cup of coffee. It was the kind of evening Judge Terrence Dawson cherished, quiet, warm, familiar. The sun was dipping low over Stockton, California, casting long amber streaks across the storefronts of downtown. A soft breeze rustled the leaves lining the sidewalk as Terrence pulled his silver Buick into the lot outside Maple Grounds, a cozy neighborhood cafe tucked between a florist and an old barbershop. At 61, Judge Dawson had long since given up on the thrill of spontaneity. After 38 years in law, 22 of them behind the bench, he found comfort in routine. Maple Grounds was his place. They knew his name, they knew his drink, and they never spelled it wrong on the cup. It was the kind of spot where a man like him could breathe for 5 uninterrupted minutes. That night, he needed those 5 minutes more than usual. The courthouse had been a grind, 2 eviction hearings, a domestic violence case that left the entire courtroom silent, and a juvenile sentencing that weighed heavier than the rest. Dressed in his usual charcoal gray blazer and tailored slacks, Dawson looked every inch the seasoned judge. But inside, he was just a tired man looking for a cup of decaf and maybe, if temptation won, a blueberry scone. A few blocks away, Officer Brent Langston had just received a dispatch. He was 26, fresh out of training, and barely 7 months into wearing the badge. The call crackled through his radio: black male suspect, dark clothing, fleeing robbery scene, last seen near Pershing Avenue heading south. It was vague, no height, no build, no distinguishing marks, but Langston didn't hesitate. He gripped the wheel and turned down Maple Street like he was chasing justice itself. Langston's supervisor had already warned him twice about his need to prove something, but Brent thought those lectures were for lazy cops. He was here to make arrests, not friends. As Langston's cruiser turned into the Maple Grounds lot, he spotted Judge Dawson stepping out of his vehicle. Terrence closed the car door slowly, rolling his shoulders to shake off the day. He was already picturing the warm scent of roasted beans and the quiet chatter inside the cafe. He didn't notice the cruiser's headlights flaring behind him. He didn't see the rookie cop's hand twitch toward his belt. All he saw was the chalkboard sign propped up near the cafe entrance: seasonal special, maple cinnamon brew. He allowed himself the smallest smile. "Already back to maple season," he muttered. Then came the shout. "Hands where I can see them." The words cut across the parking lot like a whip. Terrence turned, confused. At first, he thought maybe a robbery was in progress. Maybe someone else was the target. But Langston was coming straight at him, young face clenched, voice hard, one hand hovering near his holster. Now, he barked. Dawson's instincts kicked in immediately. Years in courtrooms had taught him the most dangerous men were often the most frightened ones. He slowly raised his hands. "Officer," he said with calm precision, "my name is Judge Terrence Dawson. I work for San Joaquin County. I am unarmed. My wallet is in my inner pocket. You are making a turn around." Langston ordered. "Don't move." "Sir," Dawson tried again, more firmly, "you need to listen to what I'm saying." "You've got the wrong," but Langston had already closed the distance, grabbing the judge by the shoulder and shoving him face first onto the hood of the cruiser. Dawson's chest hit the hot metal hard. The warmth of the engine seared through his blazer, and then came the cold bite of handcuffs snapping onto his wrists. "I am Judge Dawson," he repeated, louder now, the sharp edges of restraint still in his voice. "Check my ID. It's in my inside pocket. You need to look now." But Langston wasn't listening. He was patting him down roughly, tossing his wallet and keys onto the pavement like litter. The judge's phone clattered under the cruiser. A crowd was forming. A teenage girl near the cafe entrance pulled out her phone, recording. A man in a Giants cap whispered to his friend, "That's the judge, ain't no way this is happening." From inside the cafe, barista Mateo Jameson, who'd served Terrence Dawson nearly every Thursday for the last 5 years, pressed his hands to the glass. His face paled. "That's not some random guy," he muttered. "That's the judge." The murmurs grew louder. A woman in scrubs stepped forward. "He didn't do anything," she shouted. "You can't just back up, ma'am," Langston barked without turning around. His knee pressed harder into Dawson's back. "I said back up." Terrence gritted his teeth. The metal cuffs chafed his wrists. His breathing slowed deliberately. He knew this playbook. He'd seen it far too many times from the bench, panic disguised as authority, adrenaline cloaked in protocol. "Listen to me," he said again, voice level. "I am Judge Terrence Dawson. I have done nothing wrong. You are about to violate more than just my rights. You are about to make a mistake that will follow you the rest of your life." Still nothing. Langston's face remained tight, locked in the thrill of control. Then came the sound of tires screeching into the lot. A second cruiser. Sergeant April Monroe stepped out before the engine even died. Her expression was already tense. She'd caught the call halfway through her dinner break and had come fast. "Langston, status?" she called out. "Suspect matching the description, black male, dark jacket, dark pants," he began. "Turn him around," Monroe cut him off. Her eyes had already landed on the man pinned to the cruiser. "Now, Officer Langston." "Ma'am, now." Her voice snapped like a whip. Langston hesitated, then began fumbling with the cuffs. The judge's arms lowered stiffly. His shoulders rolled back. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned. Monroe picked up the wallet from the pavement, flipped it open, and froze. "God help us," she whispered. Then, louder, for Langston and the crowd to hear, "This is Judge Terrence Dawson of San Joaquin County Superior Court. He is not a suspect. He is not under arrest. And what just happened is unacceptable." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Langston's face turned a deep, angry red. He looked at the ground. The video was still rolling. More phones were up now. More faces watching. "Judge Dawson," Monroe said, gently pulling him aside, I am deeply sorry." Terrence didn't answer immediately. He looked at Langston, really looked at him. Not with rage. Not with fury. With the quiet devastation of someone who expected better. "You need to control your officers, Sergeant," he said coldly. "Because that man didn't see a judge tonight. He saw a target." Monroe nodded slowly. "I know," she replied. "I know." But it was too late. The fuse had already been lit. Inside Maple Grounds, the coffee still steamed behind the counter, untouched. But the world outside had changed. And somewhere deep down, Judge Dawson knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The heat from the cruisers had still lingered on Judge Dawson's skin hours later. Even after the cuffs came off. Even after Sergeant Monroe's sharp orders and half-whispered apologies. Even after the crowd had started to scatter and the last phone stopped recording. But the fire wasn't in the metal, it was in what had just happened. And it was spreading. By the time Terrence Dawson finally stepped into Maple Grounds to claim the cup of decaf he never got to order, the video of his takedown was already online. A teenager who filmed the whole thing had uploaded it to social media with a caption that read, "They cuffed the judge for getting coffee." The clip was shaky but damning, 64 seconds of a respected black man being thrown against a car, his voice steady but ignored, his ID tossed aside like trash, and a young white officer pressing him down as if he were just another suspect in the wrong place at the wrong time. No context. No check. No pause. Just instinct and bias. By midnight, the footage had over 200,000 views. By morning, it was on the front page of every major news site in California. Stockton judge wrongfully detained by officer, video sparks outrage. Terrence sat at his kitchen table that morning in silence, suit jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair, coffee cooling in his cup. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from colleagues, calls from city officials, even a message from a senator he'd once met at a judicial luncheon. The mayor wanted to meet. The police chief left a voicemail that started with "I'm so sorry" and ended with "We're going to make this right." Dawson didn't respond. Not yet. He needed space. Needed to sit with what had happened, not as a judge, but as a man. As a black man in America. As someone who'd seen the worst in people from behind the bench, but never expected to feel the cold snap of cuffs on his own wrists for the crime of ordering coffee. At noon, he made a quiet trip to City Hall. No cameras, no press. Just a formal complaint filed in his calm handwriting. Excessive force. Failure to verify ID. Racial profiling. Public misconduct. The receptionist behind the desk looked nervous as she took it. "Will there be a press statement, Your Honor?" she asked. "There will be accountability," he replied simply. That same afternoon, the Internal Investigations Division arrived at Stockton PD. Officer Brent Langston, now pulled off patrol duty, stood stiffly as he was stripped of his badge and firearm. Not in private. In the locker room, in front of other officers. His face was red. Not with shame. With anger. He hadn't yet grasped the gravity of what he'd done. That this wasn't just a mistake, it was a spark. The city's temperature rose fast. Protesters began gathering by sunset. They weren't loud, not yet. But they held signs. "Justice for Judge Dawson. Who protects us from the police? Cuff the bias." Local pastors and community leaders held a vigil in front of Maple Grounds, candles flickering beneath the familiar chalkboard sign now reading, "Closed in solidarity." News vans lined the street. But Dawson stayed quiet. Not silent, strategic. He declined interviews. Turned down primetime specials. Instead, he attended the city's emergency town hall meeting that Saturday, quietly sitting in the third row in a gray windbreaker and slacks, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't want attention. He wanted truth. The auditorium at the Stockton Community Center was packed to the walls. Teachers. Postal workers. Parents holding kids. Teens in hoodies. Old men in veterans' caps. It wasn't just about one judge anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt the weight of suspicion for doing absolutely nothing. The microphone was open. One by one, people stood. A nurse spoke about being pulled over on her way to the night shift. A high schooler talked about how his mom taught him to keep both hands on the dash if he ever got stopped. A retired Marine said he'd been treated better in a war zone than in a Stockton traffic stop. Then Mrs. Geraldine Moss stepped up. White-haired. Small-framed. But when she gripped that mic, the room fell silent. "I am 76 years old," she said, voice cracking but unwavering. "And I'm tired. I marched in Selma. I was arrested in Montgomery. I got coffee poured on me in Jackson, Mississippi, for sitting at the wrong counter. I thought we were done fighting for the right to be seen. And yet this week, I watched a judge, a man who serves the law, be slammed like he was a threat." Her hands trembled. "We didn't survive dogs and fire hoses just to watch our grandchildren be humiliated with their faces in the dirt." There was no applause. No chants. Just silence. That kind that fills a space like a fog. One city councilwoman wiped her eyes. Another nodded slowly. Later that night, a motion passed. Stockton would form a civilian police accountability committee with full oversight of officer conduct and disciplinary procedures. It wasn't a full answer. But it was a start. In the days that followed, Judge Dawson held private meetings with Police Chief David Lindell, with the mayor, and with leaders from the city's Black and Latino communities. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten lawsuits. He brought data. Reports on bias in police stops. Case studies from other cities. A proposal for mandatory retraining programs focused not just on legality, but humanity. The chief listened. The mayor signed off. And quietly, slowly, changes began. Officer Langston, now suspended without pay, watched from his apartment as his name was debated on national news. Commentators dissected his body language frame by frame. He was no longer a rookie cop. He was a symbol. And symbols rarely get a second chance. But Terrence Dawson didn't celebrate. He didn't hold a press conference or take a victory lap. Instead, he returned to court the following week, same courtroom, same robe. When he stepped into the courtroom, something had shifted. The officers at the courthouse stood a little straighter. Clerks made more eye contact. Even the defendants seemed to sit with more attention. Respect? Maybe. Reverence? Not quite. But something close. One afternoon, a young bailiff approached him between cases. "Sir," he said awkwardly, "I saw the video. What they did to you, that shouldn't have happened. Thank you for how you handled it." Terrence simply nodded. "We all have a part to play," he said. That night, he sat alone again at Maple Grounds. This time, the cafe was open. Mateo placed the usual cup in front of him, decaf, splash of oat milk, just how he liked it. On the house, the barista whispered, "For real this time." Dawson smiled faintly, then took the cup in both hands. The warmth didn't erase what happened. But it reminded him that fire could also forge things stronger. From the corner booth, he watched the sun set over Stockton, people walking past, unaware that they were living in a city that had changed, because of a moment that wasn't supposed to happen. Because of a man who stood still, while the world caught fire around him. The wind was cooler now in Stockton, the late autumn air brushing against the windows of Maple Grounds as Judge Terrence Dawson sat alone in his usual corner booth. It had been nearly 2 months since the night that changed everything, since the cold slap of handcuffs, the cameras, the press, and the weight of a city watching. But the echoes hadn't faded. They'd only grown louder in quieter ways. The Internal Investigations Division had completed its inquiry after 5 long weeks of witness interviews, body cam reviews, policy evaluations, and community pressure. On a gray Monday morning, Officer Brent Langston was formally dismissed from the Stockton Police Department. The letter delivered to Dawson's office read like closure: termination due to conduct unbecoming, procedural negligence, and excessive force. No criminal charges would follow, the DA explained in a memo filled with legal hedging and procedural language, but Langston's law enforcement career was effectively over. For some, it felt hollow. For others, it felt overdue. For Dawson, it was neither. It was just one more step. That same week, the department launched its retraining initiative, mandatory courses in de-escalation, implicit bias, and racial sensitivity. Not just for new officers, but for everyone, from patrolmen to sergeants to brass. The program included community panels, and to no one's surprise, Dawson was asked to be a guest speaker. He declined. Not out of spite, but because reform, he believed, couldn't be performative. It had to be structural, lived, and persistent. He continued his work from the bench, dispensing justice with the same calm precision as before, but there was a weight in the courtroom now. A reverence. Lawyers stood straighter. Bailiffs quieter. Even the defendants, some of whom had seen the viral video, looked at him with something bordering on awe. Not because he was a victim, but because he hadn't allowed himself to be turned into one. The silence he carried into the courtroom was different now. It had a gravity to it. He never spoke about the incident from the bench. But he didn't have to. The city had already turned it into a conversation. News segments still mentioned him by name. Activist groups cited his case in reports. And schools, especially high schools, requested his presence more than ever. That's how he found himself standing at the front of an auditorium at Edison High School, facing a sea of teenage faces. Some skeptical. Some admiring. Some just tired. It was part of the district's new civics initiative. Justice and leadership in modern America. Dawson hadn't planned to say yes. But something in him said the conversation needed to reach younger ears. He wore no robe that day. Just slacks, a collared shirt, and a plain navy windbreaker. No titles. No podium. Just a microphone and a folding chair. For 30 minutes, he spoke, not about policy or politics, but about dignity. About what it meant to stand still when the world tried to define you by fear. When the floor opened for questions, a boy with thin arms and a too-big hoodie raised his hand. He stood slowly, clearing his throat. "Sir," he said, voice uncertain, "when that officer threw you on the car, why didn't you fight back?" The room held its breath. Dawson didn't answer right away. He let the silence hang, let it settle like dust. Then he said quietly, "Because if I had, the truth would have drowned in the noise." He paused again. "Because my reaction would have become the headline, not his mistake. And because sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is stay still long enough to be seen clearly." The boy nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. Across the aisle, a girl raised her hand. Her voice was stronger. "Judge Dawson, I want to become a civil rights lawyer. What advice would you give me?" He smiled then, real and tired and proud all at once. "Fight smarter, not just harder," he said. "And never forget who you're fighting for. It's not just the people who know they're oppressed. It's the ones who think being quiet is the same as being free." After the forum, students lined up to speak with him. A few wanted selfies. Others simply shook his hand. And as he stepped out into the school's parking lot, sun hanging low in the western sky, he realized the weight he carried wasn't just his own anymore. It belonged to a generation watching closely. Back in the city, the Civilian Police Accountability Committee had begun holding regular meetings. Attendance was high. Reports were public. Complaints were tracked. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was movement. People showed up now. They asked questions. They demanded transparency. And the department, to its credit, began answering. Police Chief David Lindell, who'd initially resisted sweeping changes, now chaired bi-weekly listening sessions. It wasn't just about damage control anymore. It was about trust, earned slowly, painfully, but honestly. One night, Lindell met with Dawson privately in a quiet corner of City Hall. The chief was tired, eyes sunken, tie loosened. "Terrence," he said, voice low, "we messed up. I messed up. I didn't see it clearly until that video. Until it was you." Dawson studied him for a long time. Then replied, "It shouldn't have to be me for you to see it. But I'm glad you finally do." Stockton didn't transform overnight. It didn't become a utopia. There were still complaints. Still fear. Still moments that reminded everyone how much work was left to do. But the air was different. Conversations were happening that had long been ignored. And at the center of it, quietly persistent, was one man who had refused to let humiliation define him. Who had chosen composure over chaos. Stillness over spectacle. Justice over revenge. And that choice, made in seconds on the hood of a cruiser, had rippled outward in ways he never expected. Months later, as the leaves began falling across Maple Street, Dawson returned to Maple Grounds. It was late evening. Again. The same time of day when everything had changed. Mateo greeted him behind the counter with a smile. "Usual?" he asked. Dawson nodded. The cup came out hot, decaf, splash of oat milk. A small note on the sleeve read, "Thank you, for standing still." Dawson took it without a word, sat by the window, and watched the city outside. People walking. Laughing. Living. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a symbol. He just felt like a man drinking coffee. But in the back of his mind, he knew something undeniable. This story, his story, had become part of something larger. Something lasting. A reminder that real change doesn't start with noise. It starts with presence. With standing your ground. With refusing to disappear. One quiet act of dignity at a time. And as long as injustice tried to move in shadows, there would need to be people like him, unshaken, unyielding, and unafraid to be seen. In a world where outrage often shouts louder than truth, where anger can drown out understanding, Judge Terrence Dawson taught us a lesson not just in justice, but in restraint, in grace, and in the power of stillness. What happened to him that quiet Thursday night in Stockton wasn't just a personal humiliation, it was a moment that peeled back the layers of a much deeper issue: how quickly perception can turn into prejudice, how authority without accountability becomes dangerous, and how often dignity gets tested in silence. The real power of this story isn't in the takedown. It's in what came after. And how Judge Dawson chose not to retaliate with rage, but with reason. How he refused to let the headlines define him. How he used the very system that failed him to begin repairing itself from the inside out. That's a hard path. It's not glamorous. It doesn't always make viral videos. But it makes a difference. And that's the heart of the message I hope you'll carry with you. Real strength isn't about striking back. It's about standing firm when the world wants to push you down. It's about speaking the truth even when your voice shakes, about showing up every day with integrity, and about fighting not for revenge, but for something better to come after you. If you've ever felt overlooked, wrongly judged, or mistreated, I hope you see a part of yourself in Judge Dawson. I hope you're reminded that even in your quietest, most difficult moments, your stillness can be a statement. Your calm can be your protest. And your dignity, no matter how tested, can light a path for others. To our loyal listeners and new friends alike, thank you for joining us here at U.S. Justice Story. Your support means everything. If this story moved you, we invite you to like, share, and most importantly, start the conversations that matter. Whether it's around your dinner table, in your classroom, or at your city council meeting, you have a voice. Use it. Not with rage. Not with fear. But with the unwavering strength of truth. Until next time, stay aware, stay hopeful, and remember, justice begins when someone refuses to stay silent.